Billionaire CEO hires a waitress to pretend to be his wife. He falls in love with her. It was supposed to be just business. She'd play the part, and he'd keep his company, but neither expected to fall for the lie they were living. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. And thank you so much for being part of this growing story family. You matter here, truly. Let us begin. At 6 in the morning, the diner was a quiet refuge. The soft clink of coffee cups echoed gently against the worn wooden counters. A faint hum of the old jukebox lingered in the background, playing a slow tune that wrapped around the empty booths like a warm blanket. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls, tempting anyone who happened to pass by. Averie Evans wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes scanning the small crowd with the practiced calm of someone who had seen this early morning ritual play out countless times. The diner was her sanctuary, a place where the weight of bills and broken dreams could be set aside, even if only for a moment. He walked in with an air of quiet command, a man sharply dressed, his presence impossible to ignore. His eyes scanned the room quickly before settling on the table where Averie wiped down. Without hesitation, he took a seat, the polished leather of his shoes scraping softly against the linoleum floor. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, commanding yet calm. "I need your help," he said simply, sliding a thin envelope across the table. "Pretend to be my wife. 6 months, $1 million. The words struck Averie like a thunderclap. Her heart skipped a beat, her world tilting on its axis in that single instant. The man sitting before her wasn't just any stranger. He was Jackson Malone, billionaire CEO, the kind of man whose name was splashed across headlines and whispered in boardrooms. She blinked, unsure if this was some elaborate joke or a test of her sanity. The hum of the diner seemed to fade into the background as the possibilities unfurled, wild and impossible. $1 million, money enough to clear debts, to pay her mother's mounting medical bills, to buy a fresh start. And all he wanted in return was a lie, a performance crafted with careful smiles and rehearsed words. Averie stared down at the envelope, the leather soft beneath her fingers. Her life had been a series of choices made out of necessity, but this was a choice that might change everything. Have you ever made a choice that changed your whole life in an instant? Let me know in the comments. And while you're here, hit that like button if you're ready for a story that just might change how you see love, money, and fate. The first light of dawn filtered through the cracked window of a tiny studio apartment, barely big enough to hold Averie Evans and her dreams. At 29, she had mastered the art of making little feel like enough. A worn-out mattress on the floor served as both bed and sanctuary. The faded wallpaper peeled in places, reminders of better days long past. But here, in this cramped space, Averie held on to a simple hope. One day, she would open her own bakery. Her hands were calloused from years of hard work, moving swiftly between tables at the small-town diner where she worked double shifts every day. The clatter of plates and the murmur of early customers were as familiar to her as the back of her own hand. But beneath the surface of routine was a constant pressure, the weight of unpaid medical bills for her mother, whose illness had drained what little savings they once had. Despite the exhaustion that clung to her bones, Averie's spirit remained unbroken. Flour-dusted fingers and early morning baking experiments in the tiny kitchen were her escape. She dreamed of ovens roaring, trays lined with golden pastries, and the warmth of a community gathered around her creations. But until then, the diner was her reality, and the paycheck, her lifeline. Far away from this modest existence, Jackson Malone's life was painted in stark contrast. At 38, he was the CEO of one of the most influential tech empires in the country. The glossy magazines and news outlets adored his polished image, sharp suits, flawless presentations, and an untouchable aura of power. To the outside world, he was everything success should look like: calm, controlled, and in command. But beneath the surface, Jackson carried scars no headline could capture. A family legacy of expectations and old money shackled him in invisible chains. His father's empire was both a crown and a cage, demanding perfection and a carefully crafted image. Now, on the brink of sealing a historic merger that could define his career, Jackson faced a new challenge: projecting the face of a stable family man to ease the board's concerns. The pressure was relentless, every move measured, every public appearance choreographed. Yet, in the quiet moments when the suits came off and the cameras stopped rolling, Jackson felt a profound loneliness, a yearning for something real, something beyond the cold, gleaming towers of his corporate world. Fate, as it often does, chose an unexpected moment to intertwine their paths. Jackson's driver, loyal and efficient, found himself stranded miles from the city when the car sputtered to a halt near a sleepy town. With no other choice, Jackson stepped out and walked into the local diner for a quick cup of coffee. The place was humble, the kind of spot that hadn't changed in decades. Sticky menus, faded booths, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee brewing. It was here, amidst the clatter and quiet chatter, that Jackson first saw Averie. She moved with a blend of grace and tired determination, her laughter genuine, her eyes alive with dreams he hadn't seen in years. In that brief moment, worlds collided. Two lives from opposite ends of the spectrum, one weighed down by quiet struggles, the other burdened by high-stakes expectations, found something unexpected. A spark that neither had been searching for but both desperately needed. Jackson Malone sat behind the sleek glass table in the corner office that overlooked the city's sprawling skyline. His usual calm was replaced by a tense focus as he reviewed the terms of the upcoming board meeting. The merger was his chance to cement his legacy, a massive, game-changing deal that would secure his company's future for decades. But there was a problem, one he hadn't anticipated. The board, steeped in old money traditions and conservative values, was uneasy about his personal life. They needed assurance, a picture of stability, a family man whose personal life was as polished as his business acumen. The investor controlling a significant share of the company made it clear: no woman, no deal. A wife was not just preferred, it was mandatory. Real relationships, with all their unpredictability and messy emotions, were out of the question. Jackson needed a partner who could play the part without complications, someone who understood boundaries and contracts better than feelings. 6 months, just 6 months, was all he asked. A fake marriage, a temporary alliance to satisfy the board and secure the merger. That was when the idea came to him, simple, efficient, and coldly practical. Across town, Averie Evans wiped down a worn table at the diner, her movements practiced and swift. She barely noticed the late morning rush, lost in the weight of her worries. Her mother's hospital had just cut insurance coverage. The bills were piling up, and the rent on her tiny apartment loomed like a dark cloud she couldn't escape. Every dollar felt like a battle. When Jackson walked in, wearing the kind of tailored suit that seemed to radiate power, Averie thought little of it. She served him coffee with her usual polite smile, unaware that their lives were about to collide in a way she could never have imagined. A few days later, Jackson returned, but this time it was different. He asked to speak with her privately, away from the din of the diner. The sterile conference room he rented downtown felt like a world apart from her usual surroundings. When he laid out the proposal, Averie's initial reaction was disbelief. $1 million, Jackson said evenly. For 6 months, to pretend you're my wife. The words hung between them, surreal and shocking. Averie laughed, bitterly, incredulously. "You want me to be your fake wife? Like some kind of business transaction?" Jackson's gaze didn't waver. "Exactly." She wanted to storm out, insult him, call the whole thing absurd. But the thought of her mother's hospital bills gnawed at her. The rent, the crushing weight of her debts. $1 million was a lifeline she couldn't ignore. After a long pause, the desperation softened her resolve. "Okay," she said quietly, "but on my terms." Jackson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "No touching, no kissing, no real feelings." Averie's voice was firm. This was a business deal, nothing more. She needed the money, but she wouldn't let herself be trapped in a lie that would break her heart. Jackson nodded, the faintest hint of a smile breaking through his usual reserve. "Agreed." In that moment, two worlds, one filled with relentless pressure and high-stakes deals, the other weighed down by struggle and hope, joined in a pact that promised to change everything. What began as a cold arrangement was about to become far more complicated than either of them could have anticipated. The transformation began the moment Averie stepped through the doors of Jackson Malone's penthouse suite. Gone was the worn apron and tired smile. In its place, a world of shimmering silk, sharp tailoring, and delicate jewelry. Stylists whisked her away to fittings where bolts of fabric became gowns that seemed to capture light itself. Etiquette coaches drilled her on everything from posture to perfect small talk. Media consultants prepared her for the relentless spotlight that would soon follow. Each day was a whirlwind of lessons and rehearsals: how to glide down red carpet steps, how to smile just right for the cameras, and how to respond with charm to questions about their love story. Averie, who once counted every penny, was suddenly navigating charity galas where crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead and luxury cars waited at the curb. But beneath the glitz and polish, the pressure was palpable. Cameras lurked at every event, waiting to catch the slightest misstep. Gossip columns dissected their staged romance, scrutinizing every glance and whispered word. The fake marriage demanded perfection, or else it wouldn't hold. Behind closed doors, however, the real Jackson emerged, far from the polished CEO everyone expected. Evenings found him quietly lost in the pages of Dostoevsky, the heavy Russian words reflecting his own struggles. The grand piano in the corner of the penthouse offered a different escape. His fingers traced melancholy melodies that echoed the weight of a childhood filled with cold lessons. His father's words haunted him still. "Love is for the weak." One evening, as the city lights twinkled below, Averie found herself in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour. On a whim, she decided to bake a chocolate pie, the kind her mother used to make. The scent filled the penthouse, softening the edges of their rehearsed lives. Jackson appeared, drawn by the familiar smell. They shared a rare moment of genuine laughter over a batch of burnt cookies they made in a previous attempt. For a fleeting second, the act faded, replaced by something warmer, something real. That night, as they sat quietly sharing the pie, the divide between contract and connection blurred. Between the staged smiles and scripted conversations, a fragile bond began to take root. And though neither dared to say it aloud, both felt the shift. What was supposed to be a cold arrangement was growing into something neither of them could control. Have you ever caught feelings in a situation where you weren't supposed to? Let's talk about it in the comments. Don't be shy. And if you're loving this story, share it with someone who still believes in love. The glittering world they had carefully constructed began to crack under pressure. The tabloids, ever hungry for a scandal, smelled a story and hungrily pounced. Rumors swirled like wildfire, whispers about why Averie, a waitress with no ties to Jackson's elite circles, had suddenly become the billionaire's fiancée. The gossip columns painted her as a gold digger, a calculating opportunist hoping to climb the ladder through deceit. The headlines cut deep. In the shadows of their carefully curated image, Averie felt the sting of judgment, the cold eyes of suspicion. Friends who once cheered her on now questioned her motives. Old acquaintances whispered behind her back. And just when she thought she could hold her ground, the past came calling. Jackson's ex-girlfriends resurfaced, their presence stirring the tabloids further, adding fuel to the fire. Inside the glossy penthouse, the tension was nothing short of electric. Jackson, who had always been the master of control, found his carefully measured emotions beginning to slip. The lines between actor and man blurred. Was he simply playing a role, fulfilling a corporate demand? Or had the act slowly transformed into something far more genuine? Each glance from Averie, every smile she hesitated to suppress, planted seeds of doubt in his heart. He caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, observing the subtle way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, or the quiet moments when her guard dropped. Feelings he had long buried clawed their way to the surface, threatening to dismantle his carefully constructed facade. For her part, Averie fought fiercely to keep their agreement intact. No touching, no kissing, no real feelings. But the script was breaking down in the quiet spaces between rehearsed lines. She found herself drawn to Jackson's silences, the moments when vulnerability flickered beneath his composed exterior. The first real crack in their carefully maintained walls came after a particularly brutal press ambush. Reporters had swarmed them outside a gala, hurling invasive questions and snapping unflattering photos. Averie, overwhelmed and cornered, retreated to the safety of Jackson's arms. He held her steady, his voice low and soothing, offering comfort she hadn't dared to expect. In that moment, as their breaths mingled and the world faded away, the tension broke. Their faces drew closer, too close to ignore. It wasn't in the script. It wasn't supposed to happen. And yet their nearly brushed lips carried the weight of unspoken truths, stirring a storm of emotions neither was prepared to face. Fear mingled with longing, doubt tangled with desire. The line between performance and reality blurred beyond recognition, and it scared them both. The moment passed, but its echo lingered, a silent promise that their story was far from over. The grand ballroom shimmered under chandeliers dripping with crystals, the air thick with anticipation and whispered conversations. Tonight was the charity ball, an event where the city's elite mingled, exchanged favors, and showcased their generosity. For Jackson Malone, it was more than just a social obligation. It was a stage where he had to maintain the perfect image. And for Averie Evans, it was a daunting plunge into a world she barely recognized. When she entered, all eyes turned. Draped in a stunning red gown that hugged her figure just right, she moved with a newfound confidence that caught Jackson completely off guard. The soft rustle of silk and the click of her heels punctuated her every step as she crossed the room. Jackson's gaze locked onto her immediately, the usual cold detachment melting into something far more tender. He approached with an effortless charm, extending his hand. The music swelled, a slow, haunting melody that wrapped around them like a secret. As they danced, the crowded room faded away. Their movements were fluid, in sync, not just a practiced routine, but a dance charged with unspoken emotion. The warmth of her touch, the light in her eyes, spoke louder than any carefully rehearsed line ever could. For a fleeting moment, it wasn't about contracts or facades. It was just two people, standing close, sharing something real. Later, they slipped out through a side door into the crisp winter night. The cold air was a sharp contrast to the warmth inside, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. No flashing cameras, no prying eyes, just silence and the quiet rhythm of their hearts. Jackson reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from Averie's face. Their eyes met, raw, unguarded, vulnerable. The pretend masks they'd worn so diligently for months began to crumble. With no one watching, their lips met in a kiss that carried the weight of months of tension, fear, and hope. It was the moment everything changed, but reality waited for them just beyond the frosty air. The next morning, the kiss made headlines. Photos leaked, captured by paparazzi who had somehow managed to slip through the cracks. The story exploded across social media and news outlets, igniting speculation and raising uncomfortable questions. The board members who had insisted on the fake engagement now demanded answers. What did this kiss mean? Was the carefully controlled image starting to unravel? For Averie, panic surged. She retreated, afraid her heart was tangled in a world she'd only just stepped into, a world of wealth, power, and endless expectations. Could she keep pretending when her feelings were no longer part of the script? As the pressure mounted, one thing became clear. Their carefully built charade was no longer enough to protect them from what was real. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over one rainy evening in the city. Averie sat across from Jackson in his sleek, glass-walled penthouse, the skyline glittering behind them like a distant galaxy. The silence between them was heavy, filled with words left unspoken and feelings too raw to voice. She looked down, twisting the silver ring on her finger, a symbol of a contract that no longer felt like a shield, but a chain. "Jackson," she began, her voice trembling yet firm, "I can't do this anymore. This charade, it's suffocating me. I want someone who loves me for me, not because of a deal or a paycheck. I want love without a price tag." Her words struck him harder than any boardroom confrontation. For months he had hidden behind the armor of his business empire, the facade of control and success. But in that moment, he saw how empty it had all been without something real to hold on to. Averie stood, her decision resolute. She walked away from the contract. She walked away from Jackson, leaving behind not just the engagement, but a piece of his heart he hadn't realized was there until it was slipping through his fingers. Jackson was left alone in the silence of his towering office. The weight of his empire pressed down on him, yet it felt hollow. The mergers, the profits, the endless meetings, they meant nothing without the life he yearned for. With the decision that shocked his inner circle, he stepped down temporarily as CEO, not to escape his responsibilities, but to focus on something far more important, rebuilding what he had lost. He wasn't just determined to save a company, he was determined to save the woman who had taught him what it truly meant to love. The world outside buzzed with rumors and speculation, but inside, Jackson's heart beat with a new purpose. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. He had to confront his fears, break down walls he had built for years, and prove that some things, like love, are worth fighting for beyond any contract or deal. Have you ever let fear drive someone you love away? Or maybe you were the one who walked? Tell me your story in the comments, and if this is hitting home, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that go deeper than the surface. 6 weeks had passed since Averie walked away from the whirlwind that was Jackson Malone's world. Those weeks had been a quiet rebirth for her. With her savings carefully stretched and the help of a small community fund, she had opened her own modest bakery, Sweet Beginnings, in a cozy corner of the city. The smell of freshly baked bread and cinnamon filled the air every morning, a comforting contrast to the sterile boardrooms and flashing cameras she'd left behind. Inside the bakery, Averie found something she hadn't realized she needed so desperately: peace. Her days were now punctuated by the laughter of customers and the soft hum of ovens. She was finally smiling again, not just the polite, practiced smiles she gave in Jackson's polished world, but real, effortless joy. Still, there was a quiet ache beneath the happiness, a lingering sense of something unfinished. The chapter with Jackson had closed, but the pages of their story were still fluttering in the wind, waiting to be written. One chilly morning, just as the first rays of sunlight painted the bakery's walls gold, the bell above the door jingled. Averie looked up, wiping flour from her hands, and there he was. Jackson Malone, but different. Gone was the tailored suit and the steel-cold gaze of a CEO. Instead, he stood there, unpretentious and real, a plain brown box cradled in his hands. No roses, no grand declarations, just a simple box. Curious, Averie wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "What's in the box?" she asked, surprised at how calm her voice sounded. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that softened the usual sharp edges of his face. "Your favorite flower," he said simply. "I remember how you mentioned it once during one of those fake dinners. Thought you might like some for your bakery." Averie's heart skipped. It was small, thoughtful, and entirely unlike any grand gesture of his past. He took a deep breath, then met her eyes with an honesty that cut through all the walls they'd built. "Averie, I'm not here to ask you to pretend anymore. No contracts, no charades." Her breath caught. "I don't want a marriage proposal." His voice lowered, steady and sure. "I want something harder to give, a promise of truth." She blinked, waiting. "I want you to yell at me when I'm being an idiot, to laugh with me when the rain ruins our plans, to wake up next to me when we're old and wrinkled, messy hair and all. I want the real us. No pretending, no faking." The bakery, with its warm light and the scent of vanilla and yeast, seemed to hold its breath. Averie looked at him, feeling the fragile hope blooming inside her chest. This wasn't about wealth or image or the expectations of the world. This was raw, unfiltered love, an invitation to build something real. Jackson extended his hand, the box still cradled in the other, a simple offering wrapped in vulnerability. In that moment, the billionaire CEO and the waitress weren't two worlds colliding. They were two people finding their way home. The promise in his eyes said it all. This time, it would be different. The morning light filtered softly through the bakery windows as Averie and Jackson sat together at a small, worn wooden table. The hustle and glamour of their past lives seemed miles away. Here, there were no flashing cameras, no boardroom negotiations, no carefully curated appearances. Just two people, drinking coffee and holding hands beneath the table, discovering the quiet strength of a fresh start. Averie laughed softly at something Jackson whispered, her eyes shining with a warmth that hadn't been there before. This was no longer a performance. It was life, lived simply and honestly. Days blurred into weeks as they rebuilt their relationship, brick by brick, grounded in authenticity rather than contracts. Averie found joy in teaching Jackson the names of her favorite pastries, sharing stories of her childhood dreams of owning a bakery. Jackson, in turn, shed his CEO armor, revealing a man shaped not just by business, but by hope. Hope inspired by Averie's fierce spirit and resilience. The city's cold edges softened around them. Jackson's high-rise penthouse felt distant, replaced by the comforting clutter of baking tools, flour-dusted counters, and the scent of fresh bread. Each morning he arrived early, not for meetings but to help prepare dough, eager to be part of Averie's world on her terms. One afternoon, Averie stood at a podium in a modest women's shelter, her voice steady, carrying a message that had been forged through hardship and healing. She looked out over the crowd of women, each carrying stories of their own, and said, "You don't have to wear a crown to be worth something. You just have to be you." Her words rippled through the room, planting seeds of self-worth and courage. Jackson sat in the front row, pride shining in his eyes. He knew this woman had transformed not only herself, but him as well. Inspired by Averie's grit and values, Jackson stepped away from the corporate spotlight to launch a new venture, a tech foundation dedicated to underserved youth. The foundation aimed to create opportunities where none existed, fueled by a vision of giving back and opening doors for the next generation. It wasn't about profit or power anymore. It was about purpose. Together, they attended the foundation's launch event, hand in hand, standing not as a business power couple, but as partners united by shared dreams and genuine love. The crowd cheered, but the real victory was in the quiet moments they shared, the promise of a future built not on illusions, but on truth. In that new beginning, they found something neither had dared to hope for, a chance to heal, to grow, and to build a life where love was no longer a contract, but a choice made every day. And for the first time, both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. 2 years had passed since the quiet bakery first opened its doors on a sunlit corner of the city. Above those modest windows, a handwritten sign hung proudly, "Baked with love," literally. It wasn't just a clever slogan. It was a promise, a reflection of everything Averie and Jackson had built together. The bakery thrummed with life each morning, warm aromas of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh bread wrapping around the neighbors like a familiar embrace. Customers came not just for the pastries, but for the feeling that lingered in the air, a sense of kindness, community, and something rare in a city often too hurried to notice: genuine care. Inside, Averie moved with quiet confidence behind the counter, her hands deft and sure. Jackson was there too, less the polished billionaire CEO and more the partner who had learned to knead dough and listen deeply. Together, they had found a balance between ambition and simplicity, between public expectation and private truth. The media, which once thrived on scandal and whispers, had finally understood the real story. Jackson was no longer the untouchable mogul using contracts to manufacture love. He was the man who had listened when it mattered, who had chosen honesty over image, who had stepped down from the boardroom spotlight to stand beside the woman who taught him what life could truly be. Articles that once questioned Averie's motives now celebrated her courage and vision. Profiles highlighted her journey from worn-out waitress to bakery owner and community leader. Headlines praised Jackson's foundation for underserved youth, a venture inspired by Averie's grit and grounded values. Together, they embodied a legacy that was bigger than business deals or social status. It was a legacy of love, growth, and change. The wedding had been simple. No grand hall, no endless guest list, just close friends, family, and quiet vows exchanged beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. They promised not perfection, but presence, to choose each other every day without scripts, without contracts, without the shadows of the past. Love, they had learned, wasn't about money, image, or power. It was about the small, consistent acts of choosing one another, sharing laughter over burnt cookies, holding hands on difficult days, and building a life where both felt seen and valued for exactly who they were. As Averie closed the bakery each evening, she often caught Jackson's eye across the room. No words were needed. In that glance was everything: respect, gratitude, and a love that had grown beyond all expectations. The legacy they left wasn't just for themselves. It was a quiet revolution, a reminder that the truest connections don't come from contracts or carefully crafted images. They come from honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to rewrite your own story. This story shows that sometimes what starts as a performance becomes your most honest truth. What part of this story spoke to you the most? Drop it in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but leave a mark on your heart.